Well, this is my first review. I'll be reviewing Julie D. Nelson's article titled How the Trump Administration's Rhetoric Promotes Anti-Gender Views, available on the Conversations website. And like all succeeding reviews, this video will have all references linked in the description and are meant to promote critical thinking and biblical thinking, since mankind is made in God's image to impart, rationalize, and find truth to glorify and honor God. Skipping Nelson's hook, she begins with saying that Trump, in response to a question about the Save America Act, said, quote, "We are talking about saving America, right? No men in women's sports. And we have no mutilization of your children for transgender purposes, where your child leaves your house and they take your child from you. In 6 states, they take the child and do what they want to do. What they do is I don't even want to talk about it. No transgender mutilization of your children." And then Nelson nitpicks Trump using the fictional word mutilization. Honestly, this is petty and thus kind of hurts her credibility, hurts her critique, because it's not like what he means isn't obvious, and it's also not like he's never said the word mutilation.
I stop the mutilation of children. The mutilation, the word is mutilation. They mutilize, the mutilation of children.
She continues saying that he's making false claims about states forcibly transitioning children and that such misrepresentations help fuel the transgender moral panic. But what Trump is most likely referring to when he said they take the child and do what they want to do is the fact that there are states, at least one, which we'll get into, where if kids want to be mutilated, or get gender affirming care, which is neither A nor B, explain that later, the state will help them do so, which can include hiding the kids and or their information from their parents and law enforcement. Minnesota's trans refuge law says, quote, "The law prohibits the enforcement of a court order for removal of a child or enforcement of another state's law being applied in a pending child protection action in Minnesota when the law of another state allows the child to be removed from the parent or guardian for receiving medically necessary health care or mental health care that respects the gender identity of the patient. The law gives Minnesota courts jurisdiction in most situations where a child is present in Minnesota for the purpose of obtaining gender-affirming care." So this Minnesota law means that there are some situations where a child can be removed from their parents and harbored in Minnesota to receive so-called gender-affirming care, which the law says is a range of social and medical interventions to affirm someone's internal gender identity, including puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, permanent hair removal, voice therapy, and surgical interventions. Nelson concludes her intro by saying that as a rhetoric scholar of nearly 2 decades, she has studied how emotions propel rhetoric that goes viral, and that Trump's administration during his second term has invented threats and used provocative language and repulsive imagery to stimulate anti-trans disgust and paranoia, which is contributing to public misconceptions and declining support for trans rights and people. Nelson continues to say that the White House has denied the existence of trans identity. No, it hasn't denied that there are people who are transgenderist. It has denied that the claims of transgenderists, like a biological male claiming to be a woman, is false. Not that such people having these identities doesn't exist. Continues saying, and states have introduced a deluge of legislation that restricts trans people's rights and protections, from access to healthcare to passports. Okay, like what specifically? She then says that presidential rhetoric can have a significant impact on public opinion, and that surveys have shown a decline in support for trans healthcare for minors, a preference for using birth sex on IDs, and increasing support for restrictions in sports for trans people. Wait a minute. What's wrong with a preference for using birth sex on IDs? I thought transgenderism was all about getting your identification preferences. And notice that no evidence of causation is given for presidential rhetoric causing these things. There's evidence of correlation, possibly, but there's no evidence of causation, nor will she give any down the road. Nelson continues saying that a 2025 Pew report found that only 13% of LGBTQ respondents reported social acceptance of trans people. Well, I clicked on her link to this Pew report, and I found their survey on percentage of LGBTQ adults saying there's, X amount of social acceptance in this country today for people who are, and then 4 categories: homosexual, bisexual, non-binary, and transgender. I'm assuming this is what she's referring to when she said 13% in reference to social acceptance, but the thing is, when it comes to transgender, it says that 13% say that there is a fair amount to great deal of social acceptance of transgenders in this country today. 31% say there is some, and then 52%, 4% having no answer, 52% say that there is none to not much social acceptance. So that means 44% of people surveyed, to everyone who answered, they say that there is any social acceptance of trans people. Plus, also consider, how are we even measuring social acceptance? Like, how are the people who are being surveyed defining that? Is that family acceptance, full community acceptance? Is it government acceptance through them having certain policies statewide, local, or nationwide? Nelson says that though the causes for changing trans views are complex, yes they are, research suggests Trump's rhetoric and policies have powerful influence, the ramifications of which are clear. Then says that anti-LGBTQ plus laws and debates negatively affect young queer people, according to the Trevor Project's 2025 U.S. National Survey on the Mental Health of LGBTQ plus young people, and are associated with increased stress, discrimination, and suicide attempts. One, like the Trevor Project isn't biased, and I'm not saying I'm not, because everybody is. Two, again, no concrete evidence is shown that Trump's rhetoric is causing these things. Plus, the survey doesn't even answer why these young people are having increased stress, undergoing more discrimination, and having more suicide attempts. There can be multiple reasons for this. Focusing more on the idea of social panic, Nelson says that from the Salem witch trials in the 17th century to the war on drugs in the 20th century, moral panics have emerged across history to stoke fear against a perceived threat to a society's values or well-being. Now, there are plenty of good examples she could have used for this, but she chose the two worst examples, and doing so hurts her credibility, hurts her critique. Because you see, the Salem witch trials, first of all, how most people view the Salem witch trials, they get their idea of them from the Crucible, which wasn't based on actual events, but it was a parody of the McCarthy trials. And the Salem witch trials occurred because the Puritans rightly wanted to ensure that no pagan and thus demonic activity was occurring in their society, though I completely agree that they in no way handled that correctly. However, just the initial desire itself, there to not be pagan and thus demonic activity, because Christians know that pagan activity invokes demonic activity, you kind of don't want that in your pure Christian society. It would actually be dangerous to it, dangerous to any society. Though again, they completely handled it wrong and immorally. Though also, they were quite tame compared to the equivalent going on in Europe, and Nelson should have used that as the example. That would have been a great example. But she used a poor example, which hurts her critique. And then also war on drugs. This was not merely just about moral panic. It wasn't just about morality, but it was about the real fact of the high number of deaths caused by hard drug use and other substance abuses. Nelson continues saying that moral panics follow a similar pattern. Listen carefully. A threat is defined. Media exaggerates the threat. Public concern increases. Authorities respond with laws and policies, and society is transformed. Doesn't this sound familiar, though? A threat is defined. Well, what's the title of this article? Trump administration's rhetoric promotes anti-transgender views. Media exaggerates the threat. What did we just look at earlier? Nelson said that only 13% of LGBTQ respondents reported social acceptance of trans people. However, that doesn't seem to be what the research says. Authorities respond with laws and policies. Well, we just looked at the Minnesota law, and society is transformed. Here's a picture of transgenderists and supporters rallying for the Transgender Day of Visibility in March 2025. This picture being in the article. Nelson says that moral panics elicit a range of negative emotions, but disgust and paranoia are especially potent. She says that disgust has evolved to also express social inappropriateness, that it asserts its object is inherently bad, and that it is culturally dependent. What is this mumbo jumbo she speaks of? Because look at Webster's 1828 dictionary definition of disgust. It includes a sentence that obscenity in language and clownishness in behavior excite disgust. So disgust did not evolve to express social inappropriateness. It always has. And it's not socially dependent because it connects to morality, which, though moral opinion may be relative, morality itself is not. So, like, for example, the Bible mentions many things that are objectively disgusting / detestable, like idolatry, as it says in Jeremiah 13:27. So again, disgust has not evolved to express social inappropriateness. This is just not true. She then says that disgust and paranoia are a powerful combination for sustaining moral panics. While disgust produces an intense, immediate physical feeling, paranoia is long-lasting, stewing, and existential. To say that this is what Trump, his administration, is promoting. But is that not also what this article is pushing to? Because is not the point of this article to make people disgusted and paranoid about anti-trans views? Nelson continues saying that Trump's offhand remarks often invoke disgust and paranoia against perceived enemies, for example, toward immigrants, whom he has repeatedly described as dangerous criminals. That also is not true. Trump has described immigrants who are dangerous criminals as being dangerous criminals. There's nowhere where he explicitly or very implicitly said that all immigrants were dangerous criminals. And he at one time was expressing desire for a group of South Africans to immigrate to the U.S. So must not think they're dangerous criminals. Nelson continues saying that the March 31st, 2026 White House press released President Trump ended Democrats' transgender for everyone insanity, which touts the administration's reversal of protections for trans people. Okay, what kind of protections? Because I clicked on the link and I couldn't find anything removing any of what should be considered legitimate protections. Like they're not doing anything that undoes any laws that say, yeah, you can't just kill someone for being a transgenderist. Like, what protections are being removed here? Nelson addresses the release more specifically, saying that it asserts that former President Biden's 2024 proclamation of Transgender Day of Visibility desecrated Easter Sunday with a transgender message that elevated radical leftist ideology over faith, family, and biological truth. Yes, because it did. That is the definition of sacrilege. Biden willingly, on a Christian holiday, declared it a day of promoting something that is antithetical to Christianity, which I'll explain near the end how it is. This would be like if I willingly, on the first day of Ramadan, declared it Jesus, the Son of God Day. And if I did that and you called it desecrating Ramadan, I would agree with you. Also, yes, the radical leftist ideology of transgenderism is opposed to faith, as explained, as well as family and biological truth, because unless you have a male fulfilling the role of a man and a woman and a female fulfilling the role of a woman, you cannot biologically, naturally create a family. Nelson continues saying that Trump is rousing paranoia, and that it makes it has radical leftist ideology portrayed as an existential threat that puts Americans and their beliefs in danger. Now, obviously, if anyone is saying that the very existence of transgenderists threats the very lives of people or their ability to have certain beliefs, yes, I would agree that is ridiculous. But things that are being pushed and promoted by or in regards to transgenderism does include at least the very possibilities of some threats to some people, such as with having men who still have their functioning sex organ being allowed into women's only spaces, spaces where they are vulnerable, or allowing men into women's contact sports, especially combat sports, where they can do some serious bodily harm to them. For sake of time, I'll link sources on cases of such things. And Nelson then says that as a rhetoric scholar, this is the second time she said that, which, hey, maybe it is nitpicky, but to do this just at least seems narcissistic. I mean, like, I don't say on all my on any of my content, well, as someone with degrees in general studies and biology, no. because I don't need to puff up my credentials. You should just look at what I say and see if it's right or not. All right. But back to your things. She says, as a rhetoric scholar, I read these allusions to religion as implications that the U.S. is in a battle between good and evil. Okay, and again, this might be nitpicky, but she's hurting her own critique by doing this. That's not an accurate use of the word allusion. Allusion means an indirect reference. This is not an indirect reference to religion by saying desecrated Easter. It's a direct reference, because desecration generally is used to refer in the context of religion. Continuing with her critique of the release, she says that it also condemns the chemical and surgical mutilation of minors in child mutilation programs, revolting imagery that misleadingly depicts gender-affirming care. Technically, no, it's not misleading, because the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of the word mutilation is, quote, an act or instance of destroying, removing, or severely damaging a limb or body part. That's what occurs when someone has their body altered to appear more like the general biological aspects of the other gender. That is by definition mutilation. She continues saying that invoking images, and similarly invoking images of non-consenting victimized children and women, the release denounces the un-American indoctrination of school children and the unfair, demeaning practice of forcing women to compete against biological men in sports. Well, yeah, because kids can't even consent to a tattoo, nor can they even buy cold medicine, so they shouldn't be having permanently body-altering surgery. That is not medically necessary, that not even is close to medically necessary, despite what's claimed. And there are instances where women have had to compete with men in women's sports, though they did not consent to that. For sake of time, I'll link examples of such cases in the description. And then Nelson concludes by saying, recognizing these rhetorical patterns is key to understanding how politicians use inflammatory language to denigrate trans people and other marginalized groups. Okay, but as I've gone over, you have made absolutely no case that Trump's rhetoric has directly, or at least nearly directly, caused a declining view of transgenderism. So on this video on the most important thing, which is, well, what does God have to say about all of this? Well, Genesis 2:18 and verse 22 says, then the I am, God, said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. And the rib that the I am, God, had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man. So this shows that it is the two genders of humanity, and only the two genders of humanity, that are required to completely do all that God has made mankind to do, which is primarily to reflect his image. Transgenderism is opposed to that. It does not fit that. Genesis 1:27 says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So every human being, transgenderist or not, male or female, or denier of being male or female, are all ought to be treated with dignity. Romans 3:23 says that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, transgenderist or not, supporter or not. And that is why Jesus tells everyone, recorded in Mark 1:15, transgenderist or not, supporter or not, to repent and believe the saving gospel.